The nurse gave it to me. And, when you just hold that firstborn warm body against you and all the reality, right, sets in, oh my goodness, you know, we, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And my first impulse was to call my mom. And I reached for the phone.
Wow.
I reached for the phone. And this was many years after they had passed.
Welcome, Stu. I am so happy to meet you today, and I love that podcasting affords the capacity to meet some amazing people. And just the little that I know about you, I can't wait to hear more.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to meet you and to hopefully have a good conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I'm pumped for this. So we have a lot of things we want to unpack and talk through, but the first thing I'd love to ask you is if you could have any superpower in the world, or frankly out of the world, what would it be?
Oh, understanding what people actually mean when they speak to me.
Ooh,
That would be what I want.
yeah.
I spend hours just trying to figure out what the actual real thought is behind the words. So that would be super helpful to me.
Oh my goodness. That's beautiful. And that echoes a lot of, we've had some other folks that minister and that pastor on the show, and like that's so similar to other people. They're like, I want to know what's going on in their hearts, like the actual thoughts. And I wonder what that means about society, that we just want to, hide or hold things back or whatever. But
Right,
yeah.
right. Well, I think the reason I say that is because I think it helped me very much so with my wife. It's we've been married, like 25 years, and
Oh,
and maybe
lovely.
and maybe there's a gift in not quite understanding and having to work towards it, perhaps. But there are some days where I go, man, if I could just understand, it would have saved us a whole lot of hard conversations
Oh my goodness.
and misunderstandings, right? So, yeah.
Oh yes, that would be beautiful. Well, I would say I have a long list of superpowers that I would really like to have, and we don't have time for all of that. But what I can say is we just caught a puppy yesterday,
Oh,
like really recently, and he is the cutest thing you've ever seen, maybe. But I think the superpower I would love to have today is to be able to like command his bladder to stop. Like if I could just, like some sort of Star Trek thing, I don't know, like where I could just hold on. Just
right.
they're so cute. It's a good thing they're cute, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they create a few little problems for us, but no, we're really excited to have him. So yeah,
What kind of dog is it?
he's a Sheltie.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
fans
Yeah.
of Shelties. We had one many years ago, and he was the best. So we're pumped about
Yeah.
it.
I'm a dog person. We have
Oh,
a 60-pound lab retriever, Ellie,
oh,
that is 7 years old, and I don't even think I'm exaggerating when I say this. She's probably my wife's favorite in the house. So, but yeah, we love our pup. Yeah.
I love that. That's
Uh,
so great. Yeah, so now that we've covered that, I would love for you to just give us a little bit of background about you. And the connection here for our listeners is that you are a friend of Zach, our producer. And so I'm just curious about some of maybe that connection. And then you're also a pastor in Calgary, and you've got a really fascinating background. And so whatever you would like to share of that for our listeners, I would love to hear.
oh yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I'm a pastor here in Calgary and have been at this church for the past 15 years. And I'm originally from South Africa, and a part of my story. A large part of my story has to do with my upbringing, but just to connect with what brings me to this podcast is I met Zach a number of years ago, and I think there was some kind of ministry event. We connected, and there's just some people you meet, and you kind of just go, they really need me to be their friend. And he was one of those guys. No, I'm kidding.
That's awesome.
There's some people there's some people you meet, and you just kind of go, there's just a sense of affinity, right? Like you just feel like, yeah,
Yes.
this is my kind of person, and that's what that was. And the really neat thing about that was, when I met him, I was connecting to one of my dear friends that he was working for. So that's kind of the connection. And then over the years, we've seen each other at different types of church-related events. And he had me out in Oklahoma to speak once, and so that's kind of the relationship there. As far as my personal life, married to my wife, Ruth Ann, who's from the east coast of Canada, from Prince Edward Island, for those who know the fictitious story, Anne of Green Gables.
Anne of Green Gables, absolutely.
Yeah. She's named Ruth Ann with an E.
Oh,
And,
yes, she is. That's so great.
And we met at college, and I guess in some ways, I wasn't planning to stay in Canada when I moved here for education, but met her, and she's the youngest of 9, so lots of family here, and so when we got married, I ended up staying. But yeah, born and raised in South Africa, grew up during apartheid, and as a person of color, within that context, there was a different experience of life than I now have, and that our children now have. And over the years, as I look back, I recognize how that some of the kind of ways in which you were taught to think about yourself and others is really, really hard to overcome, and how that has still, kind of affected me as a person, and kind of made me just, in some ways, has humbled me and helped me to be, I guess, more gracious towards people. And then, another significant experience in my life was the loss of my family. So a drunk driver hit my family vehicle. I was about 22 years old, and my mom and dad, brother and sister were killed in that car accident.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And so, yeah, I was about, early 20s, and when that happened, so that really affected me as a person as well. And within about, I think, 18 months after the accident, I left South Africa and moved to Canada. And I've been here now as long as I was in South Africa. So I'm kind of, I'm kind of half Canadian, half South African now, officially, in terms of the time lived in both cultures. So that's a little bit about myself. In terms of our ministry here, super fun church, very, very hard work and very challenging circumstances. A church that has become a very multicultural and seeking to be intercultural, and
I love that.
a person of color leading predominantly Euro-Canadian church when I came here, and having to work through my own insecurities and all of the that goes with it, and to see what God has done. So I've been here 15 years, and the church that I came to serve as a pastor is no longer that church, but perhaps a little bit more close to what I think the kingdom is really about. So yeah, is that okay for an intro? I could go on, but kind of touched on everything.
that was a beautiful summary, and I'm sure there are 1,000 stories within each one of those, nuggets of information. And I'm just so sorry for all of your loss. And but I see just even in just getting to know you just for a few minutes here, I just see God's work through it already, and so I just appreciate you being willing to talk about some of these issues, and here on the trail, as we say, there are a lot of different angles of different challenges, and so that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you some about, because that's what James Trail does. We talk about trauma and hard things, in a context of community and faith. And so some people think of trauma as, it's only like the death of a family member, but it can also be other things that wouldn't maybe be defined as trauma. So we really broadly, what we're trying to do is come alongside folks as we all try to move the needle towards mental health. And we want to do that together. And we want to do that, if we are people of faith, we want to do that with a sense of faith. So at our dinner table, many times, so I have 5 children, and the dinner table is always a wild and raucous event, right? And so one of the things that we love to do at our dinner table is to ask our kids, or anyone that's sitting at our table, the highs and lows of the day, because you might have had a terrible day, but maybe there was some silver lining to something. And so I'm a little bit curious of some of these aspects of your life and ministry, if you would be willing to talk about them in terms of like highs and lows. And please hear me in this. In no way am I asking you to wrap things up with a bow or make it sound like everything is just peachy keen or perfect now. I'm curious kind of the faith angles of what some of those highs might be. So here's my first question in that way. Like, you lived through apartheid. Like, that is intense. And so a couple of questions before we dive into highs and lows. Were you aware at the time that the entire world was watching and like just crying along with you and just hurting along with you in all the ways that we can? I mean, were you aware of that at the time?
I would say, when you're growing up in that, the absurdity of a reality like that is your normality, right? Like you just don't even realize how absurd this is. I think because of who my dad and mom was, and their connection to friends internationally, I was made aware from a young age that there were people who thought what was happening was wrong. But those were not the voices, from those in power within South Africa. Those were voices from others. And so I think there was a growing awareness as a teenager and into kind of my young adult life that there were other people who cared about what was happening here more than the people who, shared the land, so to speak. Wherever you have people marginalized, whether it be individually or whether it be as a part of a bigger system of beliefs and structures that uphold the privilege of some and diminishes the value of others. I say to people often when I talk about this that the biggest loss of that in that is not necessarily the loss of respect that others have for you, but it's just your loss of who you are as a person, that you believe what the system is intending to communicate. And that's the hard thing about it, is that it is and in my journey since then is to confront not necessarily what others said about my complexion, my value, my worth as a person of color, but is to confront that which I had believed about who I am. And that's probably one of the most detrimental things I think, in my life that I've had to kind of recognize was a huge challenge to overcome. I think too, growing up in South Africa during apartheid creates within you not only a poor perspective of self but of other people, right? And so the way in which I looked at others, either through this this created narrative of idealism, this is the person who's successful, this is what they look like, and they don't have my skin, right? And at the same time, creating within your own life and in your own culture a sense of prejudice towards others, and so you start to try and better yourself at the cost of diminishing others, because that's the system in which you live. And within my own people group growing up, we didn't have necessarily the same kind of distinct, difference of color skin, but we certainly found ways to be prejudiced even within our own people group. And so it's an incredibly detrimental way to grow up, to be honest. And I think there's a lot that I didn't even understand and realize about how my values were shaped. And if I could say this, I think the naivety with which we kind of live our lives is to say that, we are not really shaped by a lot of things. We are independent thinkers, and we can think for ourselves. The truth is there are systems in our world that influence our thoughts, that influence us who we are, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. And so growing up in a culture like that, I think the lows were certainly that it affected my self-view and my perspectives of others. I remember growing up and knowing, right, like there was classes of public transportation you could take, and there were certain places you could go and not go, and so, the whole experience in South Africa for me as a young person even was one where I just kind of capitulated to what was and never really had any hope for my life to be any different. Certainly where I am today, I'm just absolutely still amazed and incredibly grateful. In terms of highs, I would say the church I was a part of, had a faith that was not just symbolic. It was a faith that engaged with the real needs of people. When you live in a culture where there is such a huge gap between those who have and those who don't, the church can't afford just to have great theological insight and teaching. It needs to actually have practices. So growing up in the church and in the colored church, so to speak, in South Africa, I saw Christianity through the lens of compassion, extended through the care for the material needs of people. I saw the Christian church be a parish, located in a place and committed to the people who lived there. You had a lot of people didn't have the means to travel to the church they would prefer. So they had to be a part of the church that was there. And so I would say some of the highs comes out of the unique way in which, the church was shaped to become responsive to the needs of people. And at the same time, the church was also in many ways complicit to what happened in South Africa and became silent at times when it needed to speak out. In terms of other highs, I don't know if I have much more to answer in that respect. But I came from an incredible home where my parents incarnated a grace and love for people across cultures, and were actually, they were pretty courageous people, because I didn't even understand as a kid that having some people from other races in our home was not allowed, and we had that all the time. So looking back now and realizing some of that reality, it just amazes me at kind of the courage of my parents and the example. And I would say in large part, the ability to overcome some of this trauma in that sense, and I'm still dealing with it, to be honest, is that I had some really good examples of Christianity in my life, embodied in my parents in particular. So,
Wow. Your words are so valuable to us in this moment, in this year. So, man, I'm just so thankful for the words that you're sharing and the way that you're sharing it. And one of the things that's, so many things are popping to mind, but one of them is that when I went onto your church website, there's the welcome page. And as I just began to scroll, immediately it took me to a pop-up that says need help. And it has these boxes, and most of them are emotional or physical needs. And it just hit me so strongly that the main message that your church is sending over your website is, yeah, we're here, and yeah, we got all the drop down menus, and you can learn about our ministries and all that stuff. But do you need help? Like, how can we minister to you?
Yeah.
And I can only, there just seems to be a direct line between your
Yeah.
experience growing up and now this website that to me says, this is a church that cares about people.
Yeah.
What could you
Oh
say
man.
about that?
Well, you almost made me cry right away, and that's not a good thing. We're just starting our conversation. I wouldn't even have drawn that connection, except that I would say a couple of things. Um, Churches can state a lot of things, right? Like we can say, here's our values and here's what we believe in, but the proof is really in what we do and where we invest our energy and our time. And this church used to be um, we didn't have our own facility. And when I came, they had been in rental spaces across the city. And what that did was it disconnected the people's mindset from the community in which they lived because most of them drove in. So there was no presence. There was no awareness of the needs. There was no people from the community in the church. It was a church of migrant people from different parts of the city. When we moved into this community as a result of things beyond our control and the opportunity presented itself for us to build a very, very humble facility. And, there was the question of, do we want to do that? We don't need a building to be the church kind of stuff. And at the same time, I would go as far as to say this now, being planted somewhere is really important. You can't embody the gospel in just everywhere. You have to start somewhere. And so when we were forced to build, little did I know how God would use that to change our church. I'll give you one quick story. Louis came to us a year and a half ago. There's a bottle depot right across the road. The church is in a weird location because you have all these restaurants around. You've got a bottle depot where people exchange, like recycling for money.
Okay.
And it's usually people that are like poor and sometimes homeless. And then right on the back end of the church, we have a private golf course that costs, $20,000-$30,000 to golf at, right? So we are in this weird place. And what we have is people walking through, going to the bottle depot, and people walking their expensive dogs, all on the same trail. And Louis came to us in need of just some groceries and help. And just to give you a sense of my own journey with caring for the physical needs of people, Louis now helps and cleans here and volunteers here with us. He's still facing challenges, but he's become a friend. He's become a friend to our staff. He doesn't leave after he's volunteered without making one of us pray over him. And I could say a lot about Louis' story, except to say this. We often posture ourselves as the one who has the resources to help those in need. And when we do have the material resources, we should. I don't think the church can afford to overlook that where they live. I don't get churches who are concerned about international mission but can't take care of the people in their own neighborhoods. And I know I'm being judgmental. We are seeing people like Louis come to us who are not only materially struggling, but emotionally and mentally struggling. We are learning how to respond. But I would say this, Skyview Church needed Louis more than Louis in some ways needed us.
Amen.
We are being tethered to the heart of Jesus for the marginalized and the outcast. I often say to our church, whenever I feel we're straying towards this very self-serving agenda, I would always say, in the absence of a compelling mission, we're going to argue about the color of the walls and the carpet. But when we are tethered to the heart of Christ, the things we fight about are really important. So that care tab brings to our door people with emotional, mental, spiritual, material, financial needs. We are responding at times to a myriad of requests in different ways. But it is discipling our people. We talk a lot of the church about discipling people, which usually boils down to teaching them the Bible. And while I emphasize that, spend many years studying the Bible and I proclaim it and teach it, it seems that Jesus was interested in us being present in the life of people in a way that is not only helpful to them, but transformative to us. And what stands in the way of the gospel more and more is a church who is blind to where they live and to the needs that are there. And I'm sorry, I'm saying too much on that, perhaps, but that's kind of what that care tab does for us as a church. Yeah.
Not too much at all. These are words that we all need, and to other pastors and ministers that might be listening, to know that there are places in the world that are doing the work that you're doing can be such an encouragement and inspiration, and attaboy, attagirl, keep at it sort of thing for folks. So no, this is beautiful. And sometimes I think about those things in terms of short-term missions. I've been on both sides. I have been a part of a church going to a place providing whatever is needed, and then I've been on the receiving end as well, like living in a place and groups coming. And I think short-term missions, I think they can be done poorly, and I think it can be done well.
Right.
But the thing that I think a lot of us miss is that the trip is not just for the folks that we're going to serve. It can be a discipleship opportunity for the ones that are coming, for the mission trip participants, to be discipled as they serve. So I'm with you 100%.
Could I just add one thing?
Yes.
I would just say this, and it relates to your observation, and it's this is why I love having conversations with people like you. It's you're insightful enough to see the connection between care and where I came from and how the church formed me. I would say there's pastoral leadership, and this is one of the biggest things that I've become aware of. I became deathly afraid that I would lead our church out of the deficits of my own upbringing. The vision of God for the church, could be Stu's vision for his own life, right? Like there's so many leaders that are unaware of what pushes them and motivates them. And I've come a long way. I studied a lot on this, and I've written 2 dissertations on it, but I would say this. The one thing that I've come to realize is that God does have the redemptive ability and power to use the brokenness of our past to shape us for leadership. But what we have to do is we have to be courageous and honest enough to face our honest past and histories and the influences and the ways in which we've been shaped. And we have to seek God's help and healing so that we can lead well out of where we've come from. And the connection between a church that modeled care for me and the care we practice, in many ways, I've never even thought of that. So thank you for saying that. But it did open up to also this kind of idea that I've had to recognize that my past can linger over my shoulder, and it can determine where I look and how I think in poor ways, but also in helpful ways. So maybe just a comment there.
Absolutely. Your past and your experience is got to play a role of, just on the outside, what I observed is this pop-up menu, which is representative of what your church is trying to be. And that is such a great thing, a high, that has come out of some of your challenges. And those lows are real. Those lows that have been experienced over the years. I'm 100%. This is part of why we started James Trail. So you are preaching so many levels of gospel right here. That's so much of why we wanted to start James Trail, is to give opportunities for voices like yours and others, and to open doors for content, so that pastors, ministers, people, hospital employees, school teachers, moms, dads, kids, all of us can understand that the challenges that we grew up with do not need to hold us back, but
Hmm.
what are we going to do about that? And
That's right.
it sounds clear that you've done a ton of that heart work, that emotional work, which makes it possible for you to step into all of these spaces today. So I
Yeah.
applaud you for that, and you're leading from the mic right here in those ways. And so, yeah, just an incredible inspiration. So thank you for sharing that very important piece to this
Thank you.
story.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I find just so courageous and maybe it fell in your lap, and I'm curious for the story of this, but you have over 20 ethnic groups represented at your church. That's a beautiful thing. Like, did it fall in your lap? Is it just kind of how you, I'm sure it's part of how you
Yeah.
minister.
Yeah. Yeah.
And tell me some about that.
Yeah. Well, Meredith, that stat has changed. It's probably more closer to 35 different ethnic groups now.
Wow.
There's a couple of things I would say. Is first is I think what what gave rise to this is that our location as a church is in a community or in a kind of there's a network of communities. They call it the Northern Hill Suburbs. There's 5 communities surrounding the church. Demographic of about 65,000 people. Um, 50% are immigrants.
Okay.
And that kind of thing. And so our location definitely contributed to that. I don't think I can take any particular, but credit for that other than our location. However, when people began to come to us, the hospitality of our people, and the welcome of our people, and the willingness of our leadership team to become uncomfortable with different cultures and people and languages was very hard work and still is very hard work, but has led to this becoming not just a representative of diversity, but a church that is trying to figure out how do you live well with difference and yet have that difference not be a source of contention, but a gift to one another so that we can learn how to live out our faith more honestly. One of the things that I try to teach and preach is that it is often in the moments in life where we are confronted with people who don't see the world the way we do, that we have the choice to learn, or we have the choice to reject what that discomfort holds in terms of teaching and growth. And so I tend to not have a shallow perspective of the difficulties of diversity, whether it be racial, cultural, or socioeconomically even.
Right.
But also trying to encourage the church to recognize the hard work of discipleship is always learning how to live well with others. And could it be that the church has the opportunity to embody something that the world has not been able to do, right? Like, how can we say anything to anyone about anything if we can't even learn how to love across differences within our communities? And so embodying a church that is intercultural and not just representative of diversity is not the mission that we have here. The mission is to help people come to know Christ and to become mature followers and to bless the world. But where we find ourselves, God has given us this unique opportunity to do that as a diverse community. And we're trying. And it is hard. It is messy. Some people are finding it to be stretching in ways they didn't think it would be. But there is such an incredible movement of God amongst the people. Like, this is probably the high point of my ministry,
Wow.
and I've been a pastor long enough to know. That's the one thing I want to say. I wish somebody in seminary had said to me when I started off, in my early 20s, that pastoral ministry and churches have seasons, and some of those seasons suck. I wish somebody had just given me a course on that and just said, the Christian life has seasons. Your leadership will have seasons. Your churches will have seasons. There'll be times of loss. Don't think you're not following when you go through those. That's just a part of the life of church and organizations and following Jesus, right? But we are in a season where we are seeing incredible things happening, and I'll hold myself back from saying more. But yeah, it's difficult, it's challenging, but it's also incredibly beautiful.
You know, I love to call this space the splash zone. I don't know if you're familiar with SeaWorld.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You
I
get
am.
you're
Yeah,
hearing me. You're totally so the splash zone for our listeners, if you don't know, at SeaWorld you go to these, you know, kind of small stadiums where you're going to encounter perhaps a killer whale or other large sea animal. And if you sit
right.
inside the splash zone, which is, you know, defined by tape and paint, usually right up next to the glass, then you are going to get splashed. But the great thing is you get the front row seat. You get to see that animal nose to nose in ways that people in the back are not going to get to see. And that's, I mean, you're talking about the splash zone, right? So
Yeah.
getting up close and in people's lives, people like myself, like many others that have needs, like that is messy. And you're going to get splashed and you might be walking around SeaWorld for the rest of the day and like nasty shorts. You know what I mean? Like it could happen. You know, getting involved in lives is messy. But then you're on the front row seat to seeing amazing, beautiful things happening in people's lives that if you're sitting further
Yes.
back, you won't get to see.
I
Yeah.
think I think so. I think it's also a scary place to be in some ways, right? This is bigger than what's happening here is perhaps by some people's standards it wouldn't be a significant thing. We're not a large church, but what is happening here is a beautiful expression of the kingdom of God. And if I could say this, right, like most of our lives as Christians, we have been conditioned to live with this mindset of um, not enough, not enough. Keep doing more, keep doing more. I think it's culture and church philosophy infused into this always more, that we don't know how to discern the moments of grace and provision and to be thankful. Um, is it a surprise to us that most Christians always feel that they're underperforming, that they're not enough? Isn't it true that when we operate out of a deficit mindset, that we're always going to feel like we are unsatisfied? And I would say this, quite candidly. Someone said to me once, you're pretty driven. And I was like, I don't see myself as a driven person. And we're like, you know why we know you're driven? You're working all the time and you keep going, you keep going. And that was really one of the first times where I realized that um, to kind of be a part of a church where the agenda is not set by this sense of one day we will be, but recognizing that God is already present and working. And right now, yeah, there's a lot of ways we need to grow, right? A lot of competencies we need, a lot of cultural wisdom we need. There's perhaps resources we need. But the truth is, in this very moment, God is saving and healing and restoring people. And we're finding ways to celebrate that, because nothing speaks to our faith in who God is than giving witness to what God is doing. And so in this church, the stories of people. I'm not going to name a name because she's getting baptized on Sunday. I'll put it this way. She comes from Iran, passed our church, walked by it several months. Didn't think she could come in because she comes from a country in which you don't change religions and you don't associate with people from other religions. She forced herself in after the service had started, stood in our foyer, looked up on the screen, and the words she heard from the pulpit was that God loves all people.
Wow.
These words moved her to come and sit in the back row. She doesn't speak English fluently. She opened her phone, turned on Google Translate. This is 4 months ago. She sat there for 2 months. Some people were trying to converse with her. She will just leave really quickly before the service is done because she was so uncomfortable. She didn't know she would be accepted if we found out. She came to my office today and she read me her testimony of meeting Jesus here,
Wow.
of finding peace in God, of not knowing anything about a statue of Jesus she bought when she was still living in Iran, and she just thought it's beautiful, but she had no idea who he was and what he meant until she heard the love of God for her. And she's going to get baptized on Sunday. And
Wow.
I get to see firsthand what God is doing here in this community. And so when I talk about who we are as a people and what is God doing here, I want to make sure that I don't do what I always feel speakers do at conferences. They give you the highlight reel.
Yeah.
So then you go, oh yeah, everything is great. Yeah, tell us
Right.
what you do, because we want it. But I also want to say there's pain here in the losses and the hurt when you have people from different cultures who are not heard or understood, who are marginalized, who don't get opportunities. When you have people who are overlooked because they don't speak English well enough, so they can't be competent. When you have people who have educations and degrees in their own countries and move here and are rejected to serve in areas that they are competent and more than competent for, there's real pain here. There's also the sense in which we are dealing with the trauma of separation. People who move here mostly move here for, better opportunity, but that doesn't mean that they have not sacrificed family and relationships and culture and familiarity. And so, just to be honest, I can say so much about a multicultural and intercultural expression of the church, but our people are starting to clue in that when we pray now in this community and something's happened across the world, more chances than not, it's happening to people who are from that country. And our church is beginning to recognize that the distance between what is happening across the world and who we are closed with people here who are part of this worshiping community, who we call brothers and sisters in Christ. And it changes everything. It changes everything.
It does.
It forces us to think about what it means to be Christian in so much more, I think, important and significant ways. So.
My goodness, if I didn't have an awesome church home, I'd be moving to Calgary like today. No, that sounds like such an amazing community. And what you are talking about is you are allowing the Lord to use you and your congregation to create community around people who've experienced really difficult things. Call it trauma, call it hard situations, call it transition, cultural, shifts, all the things. But by inviting this woman and actively, and this woman saying yes to your church and ultimately to God, she is going to have a community around her, a community of people that are like, hey, I get it. Or if I don't get it personally, I'm here to listen. Yeah. And that makes us the hands and feet of Jesus in those moments, So that's just beauty and healing in those moments. And wow, that's.
I think so, Meredith.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, another thing I wanted to cover before we move on is I heard in your intro, and I knew that you've experienced some really difficult personal trauma when so many things, so many different ways, but specifically losing your family in your 20s, as a young adult. And you used to do work with youth and young adults.
That's
didn't
right.
You? Yeah. So I'm curious how the death that you experienced of your family has informed how you see we should all be approaching young adults, youth and young adults in our cultures today. Approaching in terms of coming alongside and creating space for healing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the hurt done to hurting people comes out of poor theological perspectives with good intention. I think sometimes when we don't have an understanding of the Christian faith, that makes room for pain and hurt, for hard things to be hard things. When Christianity is presented as a way of escaping the terrible realities of our world, as opposed to a faith that is embedded in a crucified Christ who dies on the cross, we diminish the pain of other people. And I think young people in particular, I have 3 in my home. One left and came back, and the other 2 don't seem like they were interested in going anywhere yet. So we try to figure out what will happen there. But I have my ear to the ground, and the concerns that I often hear young people raise when it comes to Christianity is that there's a disconnect between the lived experience of people, the needs of people, and what we profess. And so when it comes to my own experience of loss and pain, I think it's one thing that I've had to work through to a place of honesty where I could be angry and recognize that Jesus still loved me.
Absolutely.
I could be despairing of the loss. I'll never forget, Meredith, when our firstborn was born, and Lauren, and the nurse gave her to me. And, when you just hold that firstborn warm body against you, and all the reality, right, sets in. Oh my goodness. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And my first impulse was to call my mom. And I reached for the phone.
Wow.
I reached for the phone. And this was many years after they had passed. And I say now, I guess, to respond to your question more directly, I think that I've had to outgrow poor perspectives that denied the loss as a loss, denied the fact that my life is forever different because of it. The trauma that takes from us, or the experiences that take from us, are that. And while I hold a very sincere hope in what God has promised would be done at the renewal of all things through Jesus Christ when he returns, I do not think it means I live a Christian life that does not make space for real pain and hurt, and learning that the authentic Christian response is empathy and sometimes just silence. More harm is done when we try to answer questions that we can't answer on behalf of people. And if we trust, and if we trust that the Holy Spirit is at work in our world, then maybe we can trust that we don't have to try and answer the things we can't. We can learn to be present with people in a way that not only recognizes them and their pain, but also to offer them the presence that you and I can give as a gift without necessarily having to explain what we can. So I would say, I don't know if I have much more to say on that, actually. I just think that young people want to see a faith that connects with the realities of life and offers people not just a comfort based on one day, but a sense of understanding in the present. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing from you is the importance of vulnerability in leadership.
That's so hard, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's so hard. We want to portray that we've got it together, or that we dealt with something in the past, but we're good now, or we are 100% about the trail, though, here in this space, I'm on the trail. I have hard things going on in my life right now, for sure. And, there's no bow on top, and that vulnerability as we lead, as we minister to folks really beyond, youth and young adults, but it really hits home. And man, I've just written down so many quotes that you've said today, and one of them is just empathy and silence.
Yeah,
that's powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah. Have you ever just kind of taken a glean on leadership books, um, very few times do they talk about two things: empathy and listening. As leadership strengths. It's always practices that are about competencies and abilities and knowledge. I just don't know if we are to be honest with people that as leaders we don't always have the answers, right? And more importantly, you use the word vulnerability. I think it's very hard to be vulnerable because people would rather not have you be vulnerable sometimes, because to be vulnerable puts them in a predicament, but they may have to show up at the table with their vulnerability, and nobody wants that. Just let us believe the lie, man, that you got it together. Yeah,
Right.
let us just see you up there and just hold out something for us that that doesn't gonna it's not gonna challenge us to recognize that perhaps we can come honestly before God and before others. Um, but I don't know another way to be. In fact, there's been many times where I've kind of gone home and said to myself, "Wow, you have to be discerning. You can't just be
Of
vulnerable with
course.
everybody."
Of course.
But but I've also found out that that what perhaps has meant something to people, what has opened them to hear the hope of Jesus, has been to see that I need that hope as much as they do. See, the thing of vulnerability is it just points to Jesus, not to me, right? Like,
That's
if
right.
I'm vulnerable and you see that I'm not all put together, oh, then Stu is not, it's not about going to Stu's church because he's a good preacher or teacher or like he's got it all together. It's going to Stu's church because Stu needs Jesus as much as I do, right? So vulnerability is really an act of faith, right? Like, and it's countercultural because it upends any idea that leadership is about being put together, and that you can actually lead in a way that is very subversive. It is about pointing towards Christ, and that's Christian leadership, right? So anyway, yeah.
Amen. And I think I've got the title for your new book, and that is Empathy and Silence, or maybe Empathy and Listening, Leadership Qualities We Need Today. Or I got the byline, I'll be your publicist. No, I think, man, that's beautiful stuff. And you're absolutely right. And what I find as I connect with people is as they hear, weaknesses in me or mistakes that I have made, then anything of, putting any of us up on some like pedestal is too strong, but like, oh, well, she's an expert or whatever. Okay, well, we're all an expert in something. Mine just happens to be in this category over here, but I didn't like get to be, have this expertise or whatever by, just pretending that I've got it all together. Because what happens is when I'm vulnerable, sometimes it can, and if it's a safe space, which is critical, then it sometimes elicits a similar response from someone else, which
Yeah.
really I learn in those moments, and that's what I want to do. I want to grow and learn and be stronger and grow in my relationship to the Lord, because we all need that, right?
Oh, love that. If I could connect that further in terms of just
Yes.
vulnerability and listening, I would say this: the posture of a learner is that they listen, right? And learners, like we do a lot of learning to become an expert in something, but in the process of becoming an expert in something, we know we're not an expert in a lot of other things.
Oh, for sure.
And so learning by nature can lead us towards confronting the hubris of our own lives, right? Like we when we have the posture of learner and we learn to listen, we have the ability to grow into better leaders. We have the ability to help people see their value and their worth. They are worth listening to. Their stories matter.
Yes.
If you were to ask my wife, the way that she most feels loved by me is when I shut up and listen. One of the things that I used to think was my job was to answer everything she brought up and give her the answer. And I realized that most times when my wife was bringing up a challenge or a situation, it's not like she doesn't have the capacity to figure out what I was saying. Is that she wanted to share the burden with me. She wanted me to hear, to listen, right? And so I love the idea of a book in that way. I mean, I'd like to write something in that regard, but that's just kind of one of the things that I think makes leaders, Christian leaders, effective today and appeals to the younger generation as well.
Absolutely. There's so much truth that you have just dropped on us today, and I couldn't be more grateful. And so as we close out, I would like to ask this last question, and that is, where do you see beauty in this season?
Oh, and wow, this is such a good question for me right now. Sometimes I wake up at 3:30 in the morning. It's really weird. And sometimes I'm not able to go to bed. And then I start I'll read scripture, but then I sometimes write. And sometimes I even write a sermon. I woke up with a passage from Luke 24, the woman going to the tomb. They returned with a message that Christ is risen. The male disciples, they say it's nonsense. I reflected upon this and I thought the witness of women from the early days of the resurrection is such a powerful story of how God empowers or uses the voices of those. Women couldn't even testify in a court and that testimony would be valid. And yet God would choose them to be the first proclaimers. And here's the answer to your question. As I was laying there, I was overwhelmed. Because even though I think I'm a very strong advocate on behalf of women, I was overwhelmed by the idea that women from the resurrection play such a profound role in proclaiming the hope and the good news of Jesus Christ, and have since then historically struggled to have their voices heard, believed, understood, and received. And I started to think about my mom. I started thinking about my grandma. And the beauty that they had as those who proclaimed and showed me the good news of Christ. It made me grateful for the women that are in our church. I found myself naming them and thanking God for them. And then it just brought me to a place of recognizing the beauty and the gift of the wife that the Lord has given me. It was modeled for me faithfulness and love. People wouldn't know this, you wouldn't know this, but my wife she's Caucasian, and you heard my story. It is only an act of God that could bring such a relationship together. And the way in which the Lord knew what I needed, what I did, and the way in which my wife has modeled for me that which I wouldn't have been able to get to on my own. So where do I see beauty today, this week, and this coming Sunday when I preach? In the faithful woman like yourself and many who proclaim the hope of Jesus Christ. And my prayer sincerely, and I'm not trying to make this a political issue as much as to say this, I hope that men will listen not only more to others, but especially to women.
Oh my goodness. I have no words. I'm tearing up as I hear your words and hear you speak, and I feel really seen in these moments, and I'm so grateful. And I know that our listeners are hearing you and feeling seen in these moments. So I am beyond grateful for this entire conversation and everything that's been contained in it, and also these last words that you have left us with. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on the trail.